Good evening. Thank you all for coming tonight. On behalf of the Mountaineering and Climbing Club, I would like to thank the Iowa State University Lectures Committee, Jack's Outdoor Gear Store, and the Outdoor Recreation Program for helping make this event possible. Tonight's speaker is going to be Craig Lubin. Craig is a senior contributing editor, a senior contributing writer for the Climbing magazine, and has authored several climbing and safety books. He received his Bachelor's of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from Colorado State University, where, as his senior honors thesis, Craig designed and prototyped the Big Bro. Some of Craig's accomplishments include the first ascents of some WI-7s, 24 ascents of the Diamond at Long's Peak, and 7 ascents of El Capitan in Yosemite. He is also on site at Lucille, which is a very hard 513 crack. Today, Craig is considered one of the best off-width crack climbers in the world. So without much further ado, I would like to hand the microphone over to the person you really came here to see speak, Craig Lubin.
Well, thanks very much. I'm just going to stand here because I think I can project to everyone. Tonight I'm going to show you some slides about a few places I've been to that I've really fallen in love with in my life. Cuba, China, and also where some of these national conferences are. How many people in here, just raise your hands, how many people are climbers so I know what kind of language? I'm going to try to, so everyone can understand. If you aren't a climber and you hear some jargon that doesn't make sense, you could ask later or just let it go. But I'll try to be as clear as I can about things. I've been really fortunate in my life. I think I've just been lucky to be able to travel a lot and to come to a lot of places, and I feel actually really lucky to be here tonight. I had a great day with hanging out with some very cool young people, and to me it's special to come back here because actually I was born in Iowa in Sioux City, and I lived there for 7 years, and then I moved to Colorado, which for me was a really good thing because I had a lot of kind of deviant energy, and you could use deviant energy in a lot of ways, but climbing is a really good way to do it, to use it without causing other people bad consequences. So for me, climbing just found me a place to put a lot of energy and do good things and to go and see a lot of places and a lot of people. And for me, it's great just to go and see how cool people are all over the world. You just have to be open-minded because everywhere in the world you go, there are good people. And everywhere in the world, there are bad people too. So anyways, I think I'll just get on with the slideshow before I get too far along on this path. I went to a university at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. And so can we turn down the lights? All of them? Yeah, that might help.
Doing a good job.
Okay, everyone unscrew one light bulb. Well, so anyways, near Fort Collins is this place called Horsetooth Reservoir. You can see the reservoir when the light goes down. You can barely see the lake down there below this guy. And Horsetooth Reservoir is really great because it has a lot of boulders. You can break climbing into a lot of different categories. And one of the most popular categories of climbing right now is bouldering. Especially a lot of young climbers that focus completely on bouldering. They don't even ever climb with the rope. They climb on boulders where they stay close to the ground, and they do incredibly difficult things. As soon as you involve ropes and a lot of climbing equipment and going very high up a cliff, you limit your ability to pull really, really hard moves. But if you focus yourself on doing short, little climbs, you can get your strength and your technique to a certain level where you can pull on things that seem absolutely impossible. And that's what happens up at Horsetooth Reservoir. There are a lot of good boulders. And there was a guy, I'm just going to go on a little bit until the lights go off. There was a guy named John Gill who is kind of the most legendary of all boulderers ever. And he was there in the 1960s. And he set a standard. He probably set the standard further above everybody else of his peers, more than anyone else ever can now, because at that time climbing was pretty fresh. And for him to make these advancements. The guy was, in 1960, he was a big guy too, 180 pounds. He could do one-fingered pull-ups. Now there are hundreds of the top climbers in the world who could do a pull-up by one figure. Imagine that, though. I've never done that. So now for someone to make the jump that this guy John Gill made is virtually impossible. But he made that in the early 1960s, and some of his most famous climbing problems were at Horsetooth Reservoir. So for me, going up there, it was my study break. I actually always planned my school schedule around having my classes in the mornings and having at least 3 afternoons a week free so I could go climbing. Back in those days in my college years, I climbed 4 to 5 days a week all throughout my college career. And, it just was something that I did. And one thing was I met a lot of cool people and I had a lot of great adventures. And it led me on this path. So this is some of the climbing, and this is actually a John Gill climb, this thing. You can see it's pretty steep and the holds are quite small. It's called the Right Eliminator. Here's another one that's actually my wife. But this one's more to see how beautiful the place is. There's something still about the light. Maybe it's those white mirrors that are kind of doing. This is another John Gill problem from the 60s where you start out where the right hand is and you have to do a huge move to get the left hand there, and then you turn your body totally sideways to come out of this thing. You don't want to fall right now because you'll land on your head. The thing about bouldering is every time if you do fall, you land on the ground. We didn't used to have pads. Now climbers have to carry around big crash pads, and so that makes bouldering more safe. There didn't used to be crash pads, so when you bouldered, you had to be careful. Is there any PowerPoint expert in here? Because there must be some way to get these white areas out of here. No? Okay, well, this was me back in the day. I did some research. I was a grad student, and I unfortunately, or fortunately both, the place where I did the research was about 400 yards from this climbing area. So instead of being a good grad student, I was a good boulderer instead, and I wasn't a good grad student. But in Colorado, there are a lot of climbing areas. This is one of the most famous and best areas. It's called El Dorado Canyon, and those cliffs are up to 600 or 700 feet high and have a lot of really spectacular routes. And the climbers in the 1970s were kind of leading the world then. They were doing some of the most difficult climbing there. The other place I've spent a lot of time is out around Moab. There's some really, really amazing landscapes and some great climbing in all the areas surrounding around Moab, Utah. So when I was a senior in mechanical engineering at Colorado State, I designed this thing called the Big Bro. It's my senior honors thesis. And what it is, it's a device that you can put in a crack. Here you can see a few of them in the crack that allows you to fall and actually get caught. The idea is you don't really want to fall, but by climbing up the climb and placing this protection, you can be mentally reassured that if anything goes wrong, you're not going to die. It's not totally insane. You use the gear and the ropes and the anchors to make it reasonably safe. And this guy, that was a giant Big Bro, and he's a pretty ripped guy. He did a lot of hard climbing with that thing. So for those of you who are climbers, this is a climb that I put up in France, and it's something that I have in common with Chris Sharma. We both have a climb in France that we opened that the French climbers can't do. Mine is a 512 off-width, and his is a 515 short climb. So, like father, like daughter, my little girl, she saw this crack and just started skimmering right up it. So,
Yes.
she's 2 and 4 months right now, and this is her daddy. This guy took about a 40-foot fall, but everything was good. It's Tommy Caldwell, who just did some of the most amazing climbs the last few years on El Capitan. This is a friend of mine, Skip Harper. So now we're getting into the meat of the show. This friend of mine, Skip Harper, is a diver and a climber, and he was diving around Cayman Brac, and he saw these cliffs, and so he took a bunch of us down there, and we opened these climbs, the first climbs in the Caribbean, or some of the first climbs in the Caribbean. And then he decided to take us to Puerto Rico, but we had a little bad luck. It was actually pretty unfortunate. Our ship went down, and I barely survived. It was pretty bleak. And then, came back and everything was good. And eventually my friend Skip Harper got me to go to Cuba. And for a long time I was afraid to go to Cuba because there's an embargo and it's illegal to spend money in Cuba. But we got the Cuban climbers to say that they supported our trip there, that they were going to pay everything. The funny thing is, Cuban doctor makes $30 a month, so there's no way that that could have happened. Later, Fidel Castro and the U.S. embargo, their life is, and they didn't hold anything against me. In fact, a lot of Cubans would come up, "Oh, you're from the United States, welcome. My cousin lives in the United States," and I would say, "Oh yeah, in Miami?" And they'd go, "Yes, how did you know?" And that would happen 9 times out of 10 anyways. Here you can see, Fidel Castro, there's propaganda all over the island still. 45 years after the revolution, they're still touting the revolution as his great accomplishment. Heroes forever. The cities in Cuba are pretty bleak. If Cuba ever gets rich and you want to make money, go open a paint factory down there because they need a lot of it. But we went to this place, Viñales. It's in the Pinar del Rio province on the western side of Cuba. If you take a tourist bus, it's about 2 hours from Havana. Take a Cuban bus, could be 4 hours, could be 2 days. Just depends on how many times it breaks down. So, the cliff here you can see is about 500 feet of really clean limestone that we climbed down. And the landscape in this place is just really incredible. Lots of, they call these mogotes, and it's for those of you who might be geologists, it's a karst topography. It's limestone, and limestone is really soluble to water. So when the water comes through it, erodes the limestone away. So these big parts of the limestone sink down and form flat valleys, but then you have these mounds of limestone that rise. Most of them are full of vegetation, and the vegetation is really nasty, evil plants that you don't want to touch. But on the overhanging cliffs, you find nice, clean cliffs to climb on. But again, the Cuban people are just really full of character and warmth, and I don't know. In 5 trips there, I only had a couple strange experiences, but mostly I just felt a lot of love coming from the Cuban people. And that's, it kind of makes sense. And I found this a lot in the more third world countries. They don't have material goods, they don't have television, they don't have music, they don't have cars, they don't have anything, but they have their family and their friends. And in some ways, I think that our advanced society, we've lost a lot of that. I do notice that again more in some places than others. The Midwest seems to have it more than some other places. But here, we're just walking around looking for cliffs, or actually we're riding a scooter, and these people are like, "Hi, come up, come up." They have nothing, but they're giving us coffee and their friendship, and we went and visited them a lot and climbed some cliffs near their house. And this is my friend Cameron Cross. At the time, he was 18 and I was double his age, and he was one of the best climbing partners I ever had, just super talented and just great attitude. We never had a problem. I've gone on expeditions with other great friends, and it's really hard to go on an expedition and deal with all the stress and not have some kind of falling out with your friends. But with Cameron, we just got along, and we opened these routes. These were the first. Okay, so I don't know how to make an analogy for someone who isn't a climber, but for me, my whole life climbing in Colorado, I was climbing in these areas that really great climbers had been there long before me, and they had climbed all these routes, and they had picked the most beautiful lines up these rock walls. And this was the first time in my life where I ever got to be the first one coming to a place where no one had really climbed. And so it was our opportunity to go and see these walls and pick the lines that were most appealing, most beautiful to us. For me, climbing, the appeal is a lot of things, but one of the major beauties of climbing is just the line up the wall, the beauty of the line, and then also the movement. And here you can see some fairly extreme movement. I mean, he's got a small handhold on his right hand. His right foot is right up next to his hand, and he's making a huge reach up to another small hold. And this kind of movement, it can be just amazing, the feeling of it. And this part of climbing too. Here you can see that kind of well, if you know anything about caving, you know there are stalactites and stalagmites. But if you get a stalactite growing on just an overhanging wall, what you get is called a tufa. And this thing right here is the tufa. So the walls in Cuba have all these features on them. These things are coming down, and they give you something to grab onto. So one of the things for me is being able to go there and climb really steep stuff because the holds are so big. Let's see if I can. Okay. And here you can see that this is he's about 400 feet up this cliff going out a 40-foot roof. It's 40 feet of upside down climbing 400 feet off the ground. But the holds are so big that it's reasonable. You have to be a good climber to do it, but you don't have to be the world's best climber to do it. Here's another quite hard climb that we put up, going out these caves. Another thing about limestone is that because it's so water soluble, it forms a lot of caves, so you get a lot of different kinds of really overhanging rock to climb. And because the stuff was so steep, when you lower off, you're hanging way out in space all the time. Generally, climbing, when you lower off, you're pretty close to the rock wall because most climbs are vertical or less, but on the really overhanging walls, you're just way out in space when you come down. And that's a great feeling. When you get lowered down and you're like 40 feet from the base of where you started, it's like, wow, I just climbed something that was really, really steep. And this climb here in particular starts behind the photographer, who was me, and kind of spirals out the right wall of that cave and ends up in that little hole in the stalactite and actually climbs higher above that. The first trip I went to Cuba with 3 kind of older, affluent guys who had done some research, and we traveled all around the island. And then we found this climb, and I'll just talk about this one climb. We got up to this point on this wall, and it's one of the tallest walls in Cuba, and we ran out of time, and we had to leave. So for like 3 months, I was just obsessing. I have to finish this climb. It's the biggest climb in Cuba. I can't let somebody else go do it. I don't know. It's just, we worked really hard. And so I rounded up this guy, Cameron Cross, to go back with me. And we finished this route the first afternoon that we got there. But we didn't have a lot of money. We were pretty poor, so we lived in a cave up on this wall. and we would access it by climbing up the ropes at night. And the thing about Cuba is the nightlife is so appealing that we would go out every night. So we'd climb all day out in the cliffs, and then we'd go like 4 kilometers back to town and have dinner and take a shower and maybe take a little nap. And then we'd go out and hear the music. But then we'd have to go back 4 kilometers back to this place, which actually was kind of nice because it was a disco bar restaurant inside a cave, of all things, and it was just across the way from our bivvy cave. So after you walk, for 4 kilometers back out to your bivvy cave, you may as well stop in and get another beer or 2, and then hang out at the disco. So then at night, we'd have to go and hike up this trail for 10 minutes in the dark, and then find our rope, and then climb up the rope using these mechanical ascenders. So, we always figured, sometimes we weren't in the best condition to climb up the rope, but we figured as long as you triple check everything and make sure it's all safe, the worst thing that could happen is you'd wake up hanging on the rope. But that never happened. We somehow got into our cave. I made really good friends with a lot of Cuban climbers, but one time I arrived there and I actually had just come from Quebec and fallen in love with the Quebecois people. They're so special. They have a lot of spirit in their life. And my Cuban partner was unavailable. He kind of blew me off. And that night out in the bar, I met these 2 Quebecois women who were they became like my sisters. In 2 weeks, we became such great friends, and we'd climb every day. And it was really a great experience. And I just actually went and visited her earlier this year and saw her newborn baby. And great experience. It really, truly is one of the greatest things about climbing, being able to go anywhere in the world and make instant friends because you have this bond through this kind of extreme endeavor that you both participate in. This is a stalactite meets a stalagmite, forms a column, and we put a climb up it, which is totally bizarre. You don't find any things like this. They are very rare in the world. It happens more in ice climbing, actually, which we'll get to. So I told you about the Cabaret Disco Bar. This is where we go and hang out, and our camp was kind of near to here. And so here they're doing an Afro-Cuban dance. Cuba's pretty well known for its tobacco, right? I mean, the best cigars in the world, a lot of the best cigars come from Cuba. So here the women are out working the tobacco fields. This guy's doing the same thing, and he's got one rolled up. He's smoking one right now. And they work really hard. In the urban centers of Cuba, there's not enough work. And some of my city Cuban friends were kind of lazy. Like when they needed to do something, it was really hard to get them motivated. But the rural Cubans, they work incredibly hard. Like, this guy doesn't look super fit, but I bet if any one of us went and put in a day with him, we'd barely be able to walk the next day. They don't have tractors. They do have some tractors, but they have more oxes than they have tractors. And these guys, they're still, this is a malanga. It's a fruit, or it's a vegetable, kind of like a potato, and they make this malangos fritas, which was one of my favorite foods there. But these guys are out there with their their pickaxes digging these things up. Here, you know, they have a combine that would just go through the fields and pick up hundreds an hour. And this guy, look at the middle guy. He's really skinny, and that log is huge. That's got to be 300-pound log, and he's holding most of the weight there himself. Super strong people. They live a hard life. They're incredibly resourceful. One thing I don't have in here is all the cars in Cuba are, well, there are some more modern Russian cars, but all the American cars there are from the 50s and 40s, and they've done an amazing job keeping them going, and they make the parts they need. Here again, you see there, you know, no tractors, the oxen, the horses. These guys are taking their pigs to market. Pigs weren't happy. It was one of the loudest sounds I ever heard of all the pigs. You don't really want to be an animal in a third world country. Probably in any country that eats meat, which is every country, but it's good to be on the top of the food chain is what I should say. Here's a cockfight, which is illegal here and illegal there, but it's one of the things that they do let the Cubans, they kind of let them get away with it. They know they need to give them a little freedom. This girl's having her quinceañeros party. It's kind of her 15th birthday party, kind of her coming of age. So the family will devote a lot of resources to making the day super special for her. She had a nice car that they had rented that day and a nice dress, and she was just being treated really well. This guy, well, not quinceañeros. He was actually, this picture was published in Rock and Ice magazine, and I took the magazine back to him the next trip, and I gave it to him, and he almost got teary-eyed. It was really gratifying. I want to go someday and find these two twins and take them this picture. This was a few years ago. One night I took a bunch of pictures of a Cuban fashion show, and stupidly I just shot it all on film of my Cuban friend, and I gave all the film to them because I was doing them a favor. But then later, the 2 or 3 pictures I had were really hot, and I was like, wow, I can't believe I gave up all that film. That was insane. But we spent a lot of time climbing with the Cuban climbers and hanging out and actually helping them. Over the trips to Cuba, myself and my friends have taken them tens of thousands of dollars worth of climbing equipment, both that we donated ourselves and that the American climbing companies donated. And these were 3 of the very first Cuban climbers, although the guy in the back is a musician. He's immigrated. He somehow got to go to France. The other 3 were allowed to go out of the country. 2 went to Spain and went to U.S., and he eventually went to Spain, and they've never come back. They're all illegal in Spain now, but their life in Cuba is so hard that they did what they could to get out. And that keeps happening to the best climbers in Cuba. That when they can get out, they get out, and they don't come back. It's pretty sad. These are some of the cavers, and actually the climbing in Cuba started from caving. So they got a little bit of equipment, and they went down in these caves, but then a few of them were kind of renegades because the other cavers weren't that hip about climbing. I think because it scared them more than anything. But these guys became renegades and started their own climbing club. And here, like if you could see, the gear he has is pretty archaic. He's got hand-sewn leg loops, the things around his legs that are going to hold him in, and then some kind of a tree climber's belt or a pole climber's belt there, or I don't know what kind of belt, but we gave this guy a new harness right off the bat. I took these pictures and I made him come down and put on a real harness. But he had done a lot of climbing in that one. This guy, he always climbs with a Bosch drill and a machete, so he can cleave the plants that are in his way and drill bolts all the way up the cliff. Bolts are, in a lot of rock types, you have cracks that you can insert certain types of anchors in. Limestone doesn't tend to form cracks as much, so what climbers do is they'll drill a hole in the rock and pound it in an expansion bolt, basically something you would pound into concrete to get an anchor. And that's how climbers protect themselves on limestone. And the idea of making the bolt isn't so that you fall on it. The idea is so you set the bolt, and as you climb on the rock, you clip your rope into the bolt. So if you fall, you get stopped. But you're not pulling on the bolts ideally. Sometimes you do. Here's a Cuban climber, a very steep climbing here. It's about 40 degrees overhanging, but a lot of big bolts. And this again, it's my friend who has moved to Spain. Who I went to Barcelona this last February or March and visited him, and it was just a great reunion. We just became such deep friends that we don't even have to see each other very often, but that friendship will never go away. Here, this is in Havana. There's a fort that guards Havana Harbor called Boro, and somehow they've been allowed to place bolts and anchors and stuff in the cliffs on this castle or the fort, and climb on these. And actually, back in the, I believe it was the early 1900s, Spain was in control of Cuba, and the U.S. went on kind of a mission and took a bunch of Caribbean islands away from Spain, and then somehow we gave Cuba back its freedom, and we kept Puerto Rico, and then things went downhill as far as the leaders of Cuba. This is inside the Cabaret Disco Bar above the climbing area. So it's kind of nice. You go climbing, and then you could go down and have a refreshment or whatever, and then go climb more. Just be careful about what refreshments you have. This guy had just been climbing a few months, and here he's leading a 511A. For those of you climbers who aren't climbers, that means a fairly difficult climb that most people would take about 2 or 3 years to get up to that level. On those trips, we had a lot of odd transportation. We did a lot of hitchhiking to get out to the climbs with the Cuban climbers, and all the Cuban people travel this way. They have to hitchhike, and here we're being pulled on this rickety old wagon behind a rickety old tractor, and we just kind of hope that nothing bad happens. This was the best ride we ever had. We're riding on the back of a truck full of grapefruit, eating them as fast as we can. But when we go down to Cuba, we wouldn't just climb. There are some nice beaches. Every now and then we'd take a rest day, although your skin gets pretty torn up, so going in the salt water is a little bit painful, but not so painful if if used to. So another place where I've been to quite a lot, 4 times actually, is in China. And maybe a few of you will know this story, but some years ago we were supposed to go to Kyrgyzstan with a group of some of America's top climbers. And we got a State Department warning that it was kind of risky to go into this particular region of Kyrgyzstan because there would be some Tajiki rebels, Tajiki meaning from Tajikistan, another Istan country. And so this area was sketchy. So 4 of us decided not to go, and 4 of us did go. The 4 who did go were kidnapped, held hostage for a number of days. Eventually they pushed their guard off a cliff and ran 18 miles. They had firefights going on around them. They were rescued by the Kyrgyzstan army, and soon there will be a movie out about this whole ordeal. So if I had gone, I'd either have written the book that would have set me up as a millionaire, or I would be dead. So I think I'm happy that I didn't go. So we went to China instead, and a friend had told us about this place. This is the highest peak in the area we went. It's in this Siguniang Mountains in the Sichuan province, which is in western China on the eastern edge of the Tibetan Plateau. And this mountain has been climbed not very many times. There's no easy way up it. It's super difficult. But around there are lots of mountains that have mostly not been climbed. Although I have this friend from America who he solos a lot. He's kind of a nutsy guy, and he's an amazingly good climber. And he goes and climbs a lot of things, but he doesn't tell anyone because he doesn't want to pay the peak permit fees. So he's probably climbed a lot of these things, but no one will ever know. But these are incredible mountains. These are all in the 15 to 19,000 foot elevation area. And we had set our sights. We were more interested in not so much in climbing a mountain, but in climbing a big rock wall. So we set our sights on this big pillar here. And when we camped out there, this thing to get to the top of there, we camped out for about 3 weeks below it. And the weather just kept staying bad. We got snow and rain and snow and rain. And occasionally we'd get 2 days of good weather just for the rock to start drying out. We'd carry a bunch of gear up to the base, and then it would start snowing again. So we had pretty poor luck. One thing we noticed here was it's kind of every climber's dream right here: a redhead, a blonde, and a brunette. And one of the best lessons I learned on that trip is if you're going to go somewhere where you might have to spend a lot of time in your tent, choose your partners wisely. And it was kind of weird because we thought we were going on this horse trek and that we would be in a really remote place, but instead we were dropped off on the side of this road, and all these Chinese tourists would come by in these buses, and we became this tourist attraction, like we were monkeys in a zoo. So, we might be in the tent doing the wild thing or whatever, and all of a sudden we're surrounded by these Chinese tourists. It was pretty weird. So that trip was fairly unsuccessful climbing-wise, except we met some of the Chinese climbers, which paid off really well down the road. So on the flight home, though, all I could really think about was these things that I had seen in the valley, these flows of water down these cliffs, and I was thinking, I wonder what it's like in the winter. So totally on speculation, I got 2 of my friends to go back there with me. One who is one of the best climbers in the country, Topher Donahue. He's not the best of anything, but he's just really good at everything. And on the way out boy, the cities, they have all bicycles, and they're getting more and more cars. And as they get more and more cars, it's going to be really bad because it's going to put more of a crunch on, the oil, the fossil fuel production, and also the whole, emissions into the air. And also their traffic is going to become horrendous. They also have this other problem with cell phones, and they're talking about enacting a law where you can't ride your bike and talk on your cell phone at the same time. Maybe you guys don't have that problem here, but it's a law they might do in Denver, but that's a joke anyways. So here's my friend. So first day in China, we're like, we don't even know if there's going to be ice. And we go up this valley. We found 125 frozen waterfalls, and no ice climbers had ever been there. And again, that was like a dream for us because everywhere we had ice climbed before, there had been dozens of good climbers there before us, and we never got to be, the pioneers or the explorers or whatever. It's not like being Shipton or, some of these great explorers, but to us it was really great to just be the first people climbing in this valley. And this climb actually was pretty hard, really steep and kind of fragile. And when the icicles are this thin and stuff, you have to be really, really aware about the quality of the ice and the way you climb it. You have to be very delicate. You can't be just being, really sloppy and heavy-handed. This was another climb that was just amazing, about 300 feet high and dead vertical, and we actually put up 4 different routes on this little cliff that you can see, 4 different lines up. And the cultural experiences we had in China were very incredible as well. This was my partner. So on that first trip, ice climbing, Topher's wife, Patience, she got really sick and they had to leave. And that was actually good because Topher and I had been best friends for many years and we were not getting along at all. It was pretty horrible. I was thinking about leaving myself because something went really wrong. But they had to leave, and so all of a sudden I'm just here with this Chinese kid who's learned how to ice climb from my book. And he's really strong though. He could do 12 one-arm pull-ups, but he was totally inexperienced. And he had really bad technique, but he was so strong he could still get up things. Well, I taught him a lot of things, but some things you just have to learn on your own, like sticking bits of metal in your mouth, and that's really cool. In this valley, there are a lot of really cool families, and this is more of, even though they're Chinese, they're more from Tibet. This is the Tibetan look, or their Tibetan ancestry here, even though they are living on the Tibetan plateau. And these kids were pretty fascinated by our gear, but to be honest, I actually had to pay to get them to dress up and pose for these photos, because their mother was there bartering. And I didn't mind because it didn't cost me that much in my currency, and it was, they needed money. On another trip, I actually became a godfather to a Chinese kid. I stayed with the same family on 4 trips, and I became really close with them. And it's really special when I go there. A lot of times it'll be just me, surrounded by these Tibetan Chinese, and this kid right there, the second one down, is my godson, Nabuo. This is his grandfather and his cousin. And here's me with, this guy's almost like my brother. We became so close. And in fact, he's closer to me than my real brother. It's pretty strange how when you go into these places, you can become, your human relations can become so intense and so tight. They don't just give you the gun there very easily. And I think it was the second trip, at the end, they hooked us up to go to Peking University, which is kind of like the Harvard of China. It's like the top university where only the best students go. And I did this clinic on the climbing wall there, which has since this time been upgraded to a really, really nice outdoor climbing wall. But I did a clinic and I thought, oh yeah, there will be 4 or 5 kids show up. There were like 40 kids that showed up that were all interested in this. And I did lots of clinics for Chinese climbers. I did a lot of teaching, and they videotaped a lot of it. And it got on these websites, so the information that I gave them got widespread, which was a really good thing because climbing is really new there. So the last time I went to China was with this group. I had done a slideshow in Canada, and it was at an ice festival, and some of the best ice climbers in the world were there. And this guy on the left, his name is Stéphane Houssin. He's a French guy who was #2 in the World Cup competition series a couple of years ago. And to his right is his girlfriend. She's an incredible photographer. And to her right is this guy, Francois Damy-Lamo. He's from Chamonix, France, and one of the top French alpinists. And to the right there is a Canadian guy who is the most accomplished ice climbing soloist. He has climbed so many huge ice climbs all by himself with no rope, and he's really strong in his brain. when I climb with him, I can tell his technique's not better than mine. He's not really better than me, but he has something extra in his brain that allows him to go at this, this level of risk. And he's so good that he's just never going to fall. And I hope he never does. Anyway, so here's this guy, Stefan Usani. He put up this route. None of us others could climb it. Again, he's the best in the world, to do multiple one-arm pull-ups. And it climbs up a little thin ice and then out this rock roof and latches onto these icicles. And for those of you who see climbing magazines, if you saw one maybe almost a year ago, there was a poster, a Petzl 2-page pull-out poster in the magazines that you could see the ice tool really big and the climber, and that was the same position, him, but the photographer was looking down on him, and below you could see a blue helmet, which was me, belaying him, and then every now and then I'd sneak my camera out and shoot these shots from the ground. But really incredible what this guy can do. And I'll be in France climbing with him in this coming January. This is higher on that climb. So when he finally climbed it, they spent days and days photographing it. They were there for working, actually, and they got these amazing photographs. But the rest of us hiked around the left side, and then we took 2 teams of 3 climbers, so 6 of us climbed the last 800 feet altogether, which was really, really nice that they thought about doing the group climb like this and all of us having a great accomplishment together. And here on this last trip to China, my friend Kai, who I told you about, was really strong but a terrible ice climber. When I went back 3 years later, he was climbing beautifully, and here he is leading, again for the climbers, he's leashless, leading water ice 5+, just cruising it, not setting too much ice protection, but just enough to make it safe. And I was really proud because I trained him, and now he's China's best ice climber, and he's well ahead of everybody else, but he's also sharing his information into China, which has one of the greatest cultures, one of the longest histories of any country, probably the longest. Here, we didn't really understand this. We weren't sure what happened to the climbers. But, some histories you just have to ponder on down the road. And I was really honored to meet this woman. She was Wang Dong, and she was one of the leading Chinese ice climbers early on. And her husband here, Long Dong, they put up a lot of the hardest climbs in China. And this guy, he said, I climbed without Gore-Tex back then, so I don't need Gore-Tex now. So, anyways, on this last trip, one night they gave us a really special ceremony where they put these scarves. I should know the name of these, but they're really ceremonial Tibetan scarf that they give to you, and it's never supposed to touch the ground. And it's really an honor, the way that they're honoring you, that they did for all of us. And there were, the first 3 trips to that valley, there were no other climbers, and by the 4th trip, the word had gotten out, and there were probably 7 or 8 Singaporean climbers and about 20. I had time to take a phone call. Excuse me, I got to take this note. I got to shut it off. Sorry. And a whole bunch of Chinese climbers. So again, it's just a great thing to go there, and all of a sudden we're instantly friends with all these people, and they're really happy to share their time with us. And one day we went out and taught a bunch of them how to ice climb a little better. This is my little girl. She's destined. Actually, I'll be happy if she doesn't climb. I'll be happy if she climbs. Hopefully, I'll be able to just show her a lot of things that she can choose. She wants. But I thought I shut it up. So when you call people on the cell phone, half the time when you don't get them, it's because they just turn you off, and they may not because they're doing a presentation. This is my godson, and we became really close on the last trip. He's old enough, and it's just really, really great to get so close. And they don't give you their best costumes either until you get pretty close. So that's one of the cool things about going to the same place over and over. There are a lot of places in the world I'd love to go, but if you keep returning to the same places, you really make these relationships you have super solid and lifelong. This is in southern China. There's just a couple shots of this, but there's generations full of limestone cliffs to be climbed. And there I made some really good friends too. And for there, I was the only gringo there. I was climbing with 10 different Chinese climbers the whole time. And I learned a few things while I was in China. One thing I learned is I hope we never have to go to battle with China, because that will become very, very ugly. And I worry about Taiwan because I know they're going to take Taiwan eventually. It's just that they view things in 100-year terms where we view things in 4-year terms. And another thing I learned is that no matter how different you are and how differently you were grown up and raised and what different part of the world you're from, you still have a lot in common. And it was pretty crazy that we were all wearing the same model of rock climbing shoes. So now we're in a place closer to my home. This is actually in southeastern Wyoming, Vidawoo. It's got a super magical landscape, and it's got this granite. It's kind of a beautiful granite, but it's also nasty in that it's got these feldspar crystals, and it's got a lot of wide cracks. Offwits, some people call them. There are a lot of different kinds of climbing, but the kind of climbing that people hate the most, absolutely, is wide cracks, because they're kind of brutal. They're not that fun for most people. The techniques are really tricky. The rock eats you up. Here you can see he's stacking one hand against the other in this crack. Well, he's got his legs locked in the crack, and he's using his abs to support his torso while he moves his hands up. And you can see by his facial expressions that even though he thinks he's having fun later after he gets to the ground, he really wasn't at the time. And here you can see that she's not having that much fun either. But she's using her knees against the front, her heels against the back, her butt against the back, and then her hands against the front, her shoulders against the back. It's a whole kind of whole body technique of climbing. This guy's not having much fun either. And if the colors were coming out better, you'd see a lot of red blood there on the left hand. Sometimes you lose your head in these kinds of climbs too. You just never know. So this guy's Bob. His name is Bob Scarpelli, and he lives in Laramie near this climbing area, and he put up a lot of these really sick, hard off-witch climbs that very, very few people can do well at this kind of climbing, especially at this area, because it's got some really uniquely horrific characteristics about it. But here he is, and here he is about 15 years later, still getting after it, still strong, still motivated, and in love with climbing. And all these climbs he put up, it's just a chore for us to go and repeat. 20 years down the road, it's I've been doing this stuff forever, but when I can tip one of his old climbs, I feel like I just made a really major accomplishment. And he is just so good at it. This is the big bro. What she's setting there is the thing that I designed back in college. So, you guys, most of you are in college now, so all I can really say is whatever your dreams are, they're possible. Don't sell yourself short, really figure out what you want to do in life. And even if things seem like they're hard to accomplish or hard to achieve, it's possible. For me, I've had to sacrifice a lot to have my life, though. I've had to sacrifice material wealth. But to me, it's been totally worth it. And now I'm in the point now where I'm starting to make a living. But for many years, I just barely lived, and I just spent all my money on plane tickets and cameras and to do my craft and travel. And to me, it was totally worth it. And the only thing that you have to do, really, to be able to do whatever you want is to try really hard. That's all you have to do. And be persistent. So in Vidawoo, they found a lot of boulder problems. And boulder problems, again, are just things that are close to the ground where you don't need a rope. So they've been able to really practice these techniques on the boulder problems. Because as soon as you involve ropes and gear, everything starts going pretty slow. So if you can just do it in a boulder problem, you can actually do several hard climbs in a day, versus if you do hard routes, you might do one, maybe two. If it's a hard off-wind, you could only do one. You might only do one a week because you lose so much skin and strength and motivation. But here he's got his legs locked up in the crack, and he's using a huge amount of core strength to rotate his body out, and now he's moving his hands in to stack one hand on top of the other, and then he expands his hands to jam them so he can move his legs. And he's going to come all the way out towards the camera and go up from there. This guy, too, I was pretty proud of this picture because we spent a lot of time, and he's just standing on the ground posing. And we were hoping to get a cover shot of Climbing Magazine as a joke, but we didn't. But still, that was a good effort on his part. Here, this is pretty unique. He's actually using his rock climbing shoe as a handhold. This, you don't do this every day. This climb is called Tripmaster Monkey. It's one of the most famous off-witch climbs in the world, and one of the most unique. It's very gymnastic. Watch, he's going to kick his legs up. And then go upside down. And now he's going to climb upside down for a little bit until he can turn himself back right and climb out this Rude. I don't know why he took his shirt off except that he wanted the world to see how burly he was. A lot of these pictures were published, or some of the best of these were published in Climbing Magazine earlier this year. And this is a route called Squat, and this is another Bob Scarpelli route. And I asked Bob, "Hey Bob, why'd you name that Squat?" And he said, "Well, it's pretty obvious, really. You're the turd, and your crack is the mud, and pretty soon you're getting pooped out of there." This climb is called Lucille. Andrea mentioned it earlier. This guy who was one of the best off-width climbers in the history of climbing spent 10 years working on it. He'd go back every single year and work on it, and finally, on his 10th year, he completed it. So, everybody was terrified to go up on it, but a few people worked on it and nobody got it. And then, I don't know, it was 8 years down the road, I was just spewing off around a keg at a campfire one night. "Oh, I'd go up on there tomorrow if somebody would belay me," not imagining that anyone would go belay me, but my friend Yorma said, "I'll belay you." So it was one of the coups of my life, because I went up and I climbed it first try without falling, and then I went back later that week and climbed it 2 more times without falling. And so I got the second, third, and fourth ascents in 4 days. And 8 years later, my friend Andy here climbed it, and it took him only 2 days. And he said it wasn't that hard, but look at his face. Now, come on, Andy. Tell me. He said, "Oh, it wasn't that bad," but, Anyways, whatever. So for those of you who might want to travel to Vitavu, but we're deciding not to go there because it all looks like off-widths, there are some really great thinner cracks. This is my wife Sylvia climbing something called Max Factor. And here you can see her. She's setting a piece of protection in the back. Okay, now we're just moving on. We're getting pretty near to the end of this slideshow. This is actually, I was just down in Kentucky, Red River Gorge, which is a really awesome climbing area. And you would think of the southeast mostly as having super steep folded sport climbs, but there are some really good cracks here. And this is a 30-foot long roof of this kind of technique. And you see I'm hanging from my feet jammed up in the crack, and I'm totally using a lot of core strength to hold my torso, and I'm trying to move my hands up to do, I don't know what. I didn't finish this climb. I almost did 3 times, so I did 100 feet of upside down climbing and never quite got it done. There you can see a hand stack. And then one of the I've been traveling most of this year, and the first great trip that I did this year was a really great adventure, and I was actually fairly close to here. Actually really close to here on a pig farm over in Cedar Falls. So I went to this pig farm. I was invited to go there because I heard that I could go climbing there. And it's kind of, I was born in Iowa, and when I worked in this lumber yard, they used to call me pig farmer just because I was from Iowa, which was always a little offensive, but whatever. I wasn't a pig farmer, but you could call me that if you want. But anyway, so I went there to the pig farm, and I got to see what pig farms were really all about. But this one was different, because if you can see in the back, those silos, they're a little different than most silos. They have waterfalls coming down from them. So over at Cedar Falls, this guy who runs the outdoor program, Don Griggs, has spent an incredible amount of energy setting this whole thing up where they pipe water up to the top of these silos and create ice falls. And actually that's the reason why I'm here tonight, because some of the people from here were at this event. It was called this is a mouthful, the Red Bull Silo Summit Ice Climbing Competition. And what was pretty amazing, you guys should actually cheer for this. ISU men took first, second, third, and fourth places, and ISU women took second place and just dominated there among 10 universities. So, hey, come on. You guys do okay because you kicked butt at the CU last night, too. This will be in Climbing Magazine coming out in about 3 weeks. There will be a nice article about this event and better of this shot. But here we are going out at the silos. Okay, here's the champion, 2 years running, Sean Lindsay, going for the bell again.
Yeah.
I made him post for it, and he did it about 10 times, and I got one picture that was reasonable. If you don't go fast enough, they have a way to make you go faster. So that's the end of the show. So thanks so much, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
has any questions, feel free to corner me. And I also think that some people are going to go out a little bit later, so ask someone up there where you're welcome to join us.